Good afternoon, YouTube and Facebook viewers. I am Rebecca Sisvarsky with the Register Mail, and this is Peter Schwartzman. We are with today Ward 5 Alderman for the City of Galesburg, and we are here to talk about some statistics that came through in a Parks and Rec analysis done by Hauser Levine, the consultant that the city hired to perform the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And first, Peter, before we get started into the specific details, how do you think that process has been going so far? Are you happy with the results you've been seeing, or?
Definitely. I mean, I think this is the first real look at it. This is a preliminary report, but this is the first real look we've had, and I was impressed. I think there's some improvements and additions that need to be made to it, but I think it's fairly comprehensive in terms of what it looks at. There are a couple pieces that I recommended maybe to talk about later that I think maybe weren't envisioned initially, but now it looks like it might be helpful to us. And there's clearly a lot of second steps we could take already, which is exciting. So there's some real opportunity.
Great. What was the project that you were really excited about to see in there that they proposed?
Well, I was thinking about Galesburg as an attractor. So how do you draw more people from outside of the immediate Galesburg city into our city? And so you can do that through Parks and Rec. And this report really doesn't look at that very much. It looks at what do Galesburg citizens have access to, and that's really important, very important too. But I think in terms of revenue increases and fuller utilization of our parks, we could definitely benefit from having more things going on, and we can talk about that too.
Sure. And kind of just real quick with the statistics, has the city done any studies or looked at any studies that have been done in terms of how Parks and Rec benefit the community? Because I know that the facilities tend to lose money more than gain usually, and it's the case with Galesburg as well, outside of Allison Campground. But are there any studies that show that it does attract people to cities?
Well, honestly, that's an excellent question. I don't know if we've actually been presented that specific information. I mean, from my own work in environmental studies and things, I mean, I'm familiar with the importance of green space. There's been a lot of studies done on how important it is for people to be outside and to have open areas to walk themselves or their children or their pets. It's a very peaceful thing. There was a very interesting study in Japan a few years ago that came out, and it was a long-term study. So sometime I think in the 70s, Japan had kind of a national mandate. We need to get people outside, and not just outside, but actually into woods, into the forests. And we're going to incentivize that in a lot of the business workforce. And so they had like 30 or 40 years of record of people who did take their break and go out into the woods, and they created these kind of hokey woods and nearby, but they were woods. They were real life plants and trees and things. And what they found out 40 years later, the people who actually walked in the woods live longer,
Wow.
Considerably, statistically live longer. Just because, I mean, everything else taken equivalent, but that the difference was some people walked on their break in the woods and some people didn't. And in fact, there was a differentiation between just walking and walking in the woods. And apparently walking in the woods has some tangible benefit to us. And sometimes it's hard to quantify that. But I also know from my education that children in particular, it's really important for them to get outside and to play outside. And we have a nationwide epidemic where children are inside playing video games, watching TV on their iPads, all this stuff. And so having fun and exciting and accessible places where kids can be outside playing is really important, I think, to a community.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting study in Japan too. I wonder if Galesburg had like something like that along the lines in the future, like just studies see if it lives longer or if people live longer. But to go into the actual plan, then some of the statistics, and there's a lot in this packet, it's a pretty big one, but one of the stats that stood out to me was that in a survey that the consulting firm Hauser Levine sent out to 375 people responded, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but that was really a 95% response rate, right?
Well, it's called a confidence interval. So that means the data we're getting is 95% confident that we're getting data that applies to the entire population. It's kind of hard for the general public to understand some of that. I actually teach statistics, so I have a kind of a more familiarity with it. But typically the response rate to the survey was about 10%. And in a community like this, that's actually quite good. They usually go for about eight. I think he said 8.5%. So we got a good return on that. But then the information we glean from that is predictive of the larger community, and that's really the point. You're never going to get a huge response rate on any survey that you send out. But if you get enough, which we apparently did, then you can draw conclusions from, and that's the key.
Sure. And out of those 375, then it turns out 35% said that they're very satisfied with Galesburg's Park and Rec program, and most communities only have a 20% very satisfied rate. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, well, not only did 35% say they were very satisfied, but then another 50-something% said they were satisfied, which that's over 85%. And that's, I mean, I like the 35%, but I also like the 85%. We often hear a lot, the people who are angry or frustrated are the ones that are usually the loudest. So you hear things here and there which might suggest otherwise. But, this data, which is across the entire community, tells us something I think that's more reflective of the reality than maybe a few frustrated or outspoken people. And that's really important. And you're dealing, the statistic you talk about has to do with the programs. And so those are the things that the city is providing for the community. And if 85% satisfaction rate is amazing, I think. I'd be interested in the there is some evidence within the research. What is that 15%? The folks that are not satisfied, what is their issue? Is it that we don't have enough parks? Is it that the timing is wrong? Is it that they're not accessible? So there's things that we can learn from the 15%. I just wouldn't ignore them. But I do, yeah. And if 20% is the general number, but we have 35 very satisfied, that's good to know. And I sense that too, just from the folks that I talk to in the community, my constituents. I get a sense that our Parks and Rec is a really a very, very well run program, and it's gotten some recent boost, right, with some investment, which we could talk about some of the park improvements that have been made, and in fact this is the last year.
Absolutely. And before we do that, though, you mentioned the 15%, and that was a good point as well, because one of the things that people expressed concern about was a lack of parks on the south side of town. Even though Galesburg has, the study shows acreage, I could get the exact amount of acreage here, but it is a big amount. How does the city hope to address that then, in terms of bringing parks in the future and the lack on the south side?
Well, I think that's a discussion still to be had. I mean, I think when this report comes out, it's not meant to be, this is what you guys should do and we're just going to do it. This is the information we have. These are some of the recommendations we make. What do you guys make of it? And so we're in fact just in the beginning of digesting this information. I think that's true of the community as well. People have perceptions, and their perceptions sometimes are reality and sometimes they're not. And some people on the north side of town might not be as familiar with the situation on the south side. Now, I mean, Kiwanis Park is a pretty large park on the south side of town, but it's on the far east side of town, so it's not accessible to a lot of people. It also has a lot of very good amenities, which is nice too. But again, if those amenities were more centrally located, they'd be more accessible to everyone. So I think in terms of the acreage question, yeah, we do. We have Lake Story, we have Kiwanis, and we have Rotary now, which is fantastic. In terms of just how it came about and the incredible generosity of all the people involved. I mean, it's hard to imagine. There should be front page news, I think, for several days on that topic, because there aren't too many communities that come together for that chunk of money, and how they. It took a long time, but it was, I think, done with the right energy, and it shows a collective effort. But those are three large parks we have. But we have a large city, and for kids especially, we don't have really good bike paths for kids to get from place to place. So unless you have a park right near your home, you're probably not going to go to it, or you're going to, your parents are going to have to drive you, and a lot of people don't have cars. So then the kids who don't have parents who have cars, or parents who work three shifts or whatever, may not be able to get to the parks. So they're really, I think, one thing that came out of the report is the importance of having neighborhood parks. Don't have to be large, but they have to have things that kids can. They have to have land that kids can use, and maybe a few amenities. And that was one of the things in fact, before this report came out last year, our new park and rec director Tony, he reported to us that there had been limited maintenance on many of the parks for much too long, and so we decided to invest. I think it was something about $500,000 this 2017 to get those up to speed, and they were able to put in, not only fix some of the things that were problematic, but also to put in some new features. Bateman Park is a good example, which is in Ward 4, right on the border of Ward 5 in my ward. That park was, had limited amenities, and now I was driving by it over the summer, and I saw lots of kids out there, and families too, and I think that's what you want. That's what you want, and getting people outside, getting people, even neighbors meeting each other. A park is a great place to encourage that kind of thing, and also I think there's a safety sense. If people are outside and playing, there's a sense that the community's safe and people can walk, and I really think that's really important. And the statistics show that Galesburg is a very safe community. But sometimes if you're watching television and you see all these reports coming from other cities and other places, you get fearful. And so I think it's important to visually see people outside playing.
Definitely. And just so the viewers know, I did get the exact statistics. It says in the report that total park land in Galesburg is 623 acres. So, in the national standard, let's see. Oh, I should say the actual average 19.5 acre per 1,000 population, and the NRPA standard is 6.25 to 1050 acre
Right.
per.
So that suggests that Galesburg actually has a very high amount of acreage dedicated to parks compared to most cities in the country. And I think, I've been around fair places, and I would think that's probably true. My sense is that, but we really have kind of 3 large parks and a lot of very small parks. And so then the question is, are they accessible? Because 2 of them are all of them are kind of on the edges of town. There's none in the central part of town. One of the things I'd like to see happen is some play space in the downtown area. And we have some great green spaces downtown. We have a new park downtown, but it's not really for children. It's not one you can just pull out a ball and kick it around or throw it around. And if we want people to go downtown. We want commerce to be very active downtown, and parents bring their children. Well, where are they going to go? Right now, there's really not a very good space for them to play, and I think there are some open spaces that could be converted into play area. And again, it doesn't have to be huge. But it's like a magnet, and that's the kind of thing I see in other communities, and I would encourage us to do that. Now, we'll see if that happens. That's just an idea, but and it's also in Ward 5. It turns out, believe it or not, in Ward 5, the only park we have is the new park, Viewpoint Park, that was built. But that park it's a nice park. It's a great park. It's another example of wonderful collaboration. The fire department did an amazing amount of volunteer work to get that done, and the fundraising and whatever. But it's a place you go have lunch and sit. It's very pretty. It's very small, but it's functional, and I'm glad it's there. But it's not a place for kids to play. And so, I think if we think about it, we do have some open spaces downtown. That would be something we should consider.
And kind of going back to that, Peter, what you said about the community collaboration, you mentioned the Rotary Park as well earlier. I understand state governments and city governments, the belt's tightening every day in terms of budgets. And Galesburg has had a history, like you say, between that park, Full Viewpoint, Rotary, and the dog park even, was all get community collaboration or private fundraising involved. How is the city right now actively trying to create community partnerships to see if there's another way to either through community collaboration or private investment bring these different parks to the city?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think this plan that we're going to get fuller information at the end in the next few months is our attempt to ask an external body who is an expert in this field. What do we have? What do we need? What do the people want? And once we know that and we have a better a comprehensive sense of that, then we can, I think we can build those relationships. I think there's a tendency or hesitation to go too far into that area without knowing what we need. Now, some of the things that are happening, even without a tremendous amount of city effort, I think could because we have very generous people in our community, and I think the Viewpoint Park came about. There was an empty lot. Someone saw it. Someone said, "Look, I'm willing to donate." Some family's very generous. "I'm willing to donate X amount of money. Can we have this happen?" They talked to some people in the city. The city said, "Well, sure. That'd be a great effort. Let's see what we can do." And the same is true with Rotary. Okay, but so we have really generous and very thoughtful people in our community who make these things happen. I think you're right, though. The city government has played a role and can continue to play a role in that. I think what's a little bit different about this information we're getting now is it really does clarify for the city leaders what is it that we have and what is it that the community wants, and then we can invest our limited dollars in that area. There's some questions in this survey as well about are you willing to pay more or less? What is your willingness to pay for some of these things? And I'd also point out, our belts are tightened over the years for lots of reasons. State budgets have been somewhat limited, but I would suggest that we still have money. Okay, we're building a lot of new roads, we're building new bridges, we're doing a lot of other things. We had to go get that from some source, and so I tend not to be a person who thinks we have to be austere with our resources in this point where we can't think of. We have to basically put a box over our heads and not think about anything new. I think that's the wrong mindset. What we need to do is clarify what it is we need, see what makes sense financially, and then go for it. And I would really highlight the point. Parks and Rec has a lot to do with quality of life, not only for the people that live in the community, which is the most important, but also people who may be visiting the community. And if you have a high quality of life in your community, well, you're going to attract more business, you're going to attract more people to live in your community, and that's going to improve tax revenues, that's going to improve the fuller utilization of the amenities we have, and we have seen a decline in our population over the last 30-40 years. Well, what's the cause of that? We talk about that, but how can we positively respond to that? I think, how can we bring new people in? Well, Parks and Rec is a great way to do so, and I would emphasize, and this report doesn't talk as much about the activities for children, although there's some elements at the end of it. But I think that's if you create fun things for kids to do, parents are happy, kids are excited. They're going to have a long-standing memory of the value of Galesburg, the excitement that they grew up in, and so forth, and the connection they have. And I think I'm very excited about Tony in particular and his knowledge and expertise in programming for both adults and children. Because my children are involved in those kinds of things. My friends' children are, and so are my constituents. I hear a lot of positive things, but we have some big decisions to make because we have a city-owned pool. Are we going to maintain it? It's going to cost a lot of money. Is it if it has its time expired in terms of the investment? Would it be better to collaborate with, say, the YMCA or maybe some other entities, the colleges? There's different ways to utilize our resources more efficiently, and I'm interested in those collaborations.
Sure. Kind of going off of that though, Peter, I am curious, something I'm still not really understanding. The city did get, like you say, this report on Monday. It's not the full plan, but it is pretty thorough. It gives a good idea of what people want, including the survey. And the actual plan won't be done until May, which I know is right before the 2019 budgeting process begins. But why does the city not say right now, hey, we have this report, we have this survey, we know generally the top 5 things people want. Why don't we start reaching out to people now, before we wait to that point? Why wait another couple months?
Well, no, that's an excellent question. I think there's differences of opinion among the council. on that regard. I think I think there's a general feeling that we've waited this long. To wait a few more months is not going to change anything too much. I think getting these ideas out there, though, people are talking about it and people are thinking about it, and that's important. So it's not as if we're keeping this in a safe somewhere and not sharing the information. I think it's how the history of Galesburg, at least in recent history, has operated. Right, we're more conservative in terms of how we move forward on projects. We want maybe the final recommendations from this report, which won't be ready for a few more months. And I think we're glad to see some early indications of what might happen. And in fact, like to do anything this year, well, we had a budget for in last year, which we passed last month. Okay, well, we have a little bit of money that's set aside for something. Doesn't mean we have to spend it, but and it was initially set aside for a miniature golf course. Well, there's some discussions. Well, is that really what we want? There's some people who think that makes sense. Well, how much is it going to cost? Do we have enough money for it? Can it be a cooperation between a private business or maybe another community entity and the city? These are discussions that are continuing to be had. I'd also point out that this is a very comprehensive report, but for any given activity that we might choose to direction to go, we'd probably need additional study, and not a years long study, but how much does it cost to create a small park in downtown? Well, we don't know that, right? And then, well, what kind of amenities do we want? Well, then we have to see. So once you get more specific, then you have to kind of run the numbers again, because in many regards it does come down to some type of financing. But you're also right to remind us that it doesn't always have to be, or doesn't clearly have to be 100% city funded project. And I like the collaborations, and I would encourage that no matter what we do. But I also think, again, back to my earlier point, that there are things we can do, and they're investments. And if you make those investments, they will multiply in terms of their benefit, especially downtown, right? So if we have more commerce downtown, that's going to improve everything. And there's lots of studies that talk about how local spending it has a multiplying effect, and I'm a big proponent of that. So to the extent that we can have our money spent at local businesses downtown, it's going to improve finances. It's going to provide us resources for future amenities down the road.
Great. And my last question then, Peter, is just kind of going off of that. You mentioned the $300,000 that the city set aside in its current budget for FY 2018. And definitely some of the projects that residents said they wanted, like the community center, if they want that, or recreation center, depending on the term, won't fit in that realm. That would be millions, at least over $1 million.
Sure.
There's some other projects that maybe could be handled by other departments, maybe bikes, like you say, on the streets, more bike paths, could be roads. So given that, what are some projects, and besides the mini golf you mentioned, that might be able to fit in that range that the city would be considering?
Right. Well, there is some thought that a mini golf course could fit into that. I mean, it would be a low end course, not a very very fancy one. But also that's going to bring some revenues. So then you have to look at that. Some services, some amenities won't immediately draw revenues in a clear case. You're not going to charge people to go to Rotary Park, for instance, or a downtown park, unless it has maybe a miniature golf course, in which case. But that money can also be leveraged, right? So it doesn't have to be the 100%, but it could be a down payment on something. If it's something we really want to do, we still have bond monies that we could decide where they go. I know there's some disagreement in the community what that bond money was for. Some people say it was 100% for roads and streets and sidewalks. That's not my impression. That was not the impression of several of the council members. And so in fact, some of the $500,000 that we got for parks last year came out of that bond money, and that was a decision. Obviously, had to be voted in by a majority of the council. So I think that sets a precedent. And so there is some additional money there that we could utilize. The energy tax that was created a few years ago that pulls in something like $2.5 million a year in revenue. Well, what are we doing with that? Well, again, some people think that that was just for streets and sidewalks. I think the majority of it is, but again, some of that we have to decide each year, what are we going to use it for? And so there's additional money. But I'd also point out, right, if you have a big project that may cost $1 million or more, there's other opportunities, right? There's other grants out there, federal, state, for these things. I mean, our library, future library, we're not going to pay for most of it. It's going to come from a state grant. Hopefully, that will be funded at some point in the near future. But why are we even in that queue? Well, we got in that queue because of proactive actions, and we're now, I think, third in line to get money for that. And the same thing can exist in a different area. But also we can get, if it's a community-based project that really has a lot of support, well, philanthropists in our community can support it. And they can get it named after them, or they can, purchase one arm of it. I mean, the YMCA does a lot of this type of thing, and they're very, very successful. And I love the Y, and I wouldn't want to replicate what the Y does. But it's clear that even though we have an amazing YMCA program in Galesburg, there are still some needs that are not being met by them, which of course would be true anywhere. So what are those, and what can the city do, and how can the city partner with other groups to make them happen? And I think that's what's exciting about this an early stage report, is that there are some needs, and there does seem to be some like kernels of excitement around a couple of ideas, and it's not just across the board, like everybody wants a little of everything. It does appear that in our community with these surveys that there are a couple areas that would really make a difference for people, and I agree, and I want to see it happen, and it's going to take a little bit of work and thought and maybe a little bit of risk, but I think that in the end we can all really really enjoy the process, and then also the outcomes.
I think that was a great way to wrap it up. So
thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome, Peter. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in as well.